Julie and I have met online, and it's a pleasure to meet you in person today and to talk about this wonderful book. So my first question is really a two-part question. Several will be. I'm wondering which came first, a group of stories about Jeremiah, and then the idea to make it a book, or the idea to write a novel using the story form. And the second part of that question references the subtitle of the book, which is A Novel in Stories. I wonder about that. For those of you who haven't read it yet, these stories/chapters are told from different points of view, and they're not set in chronological order. So I wondered about calling it A Novel in Stories, and in fact, when we were introduced, it was called a story collection. I thought about, well, is that for marketing? Because novels sell better than story collections, which I don't say with any criticism. Anything that gets this great book into the hands of readers, you should do. But was it for marketing, or was it a literary decision? What's the difference between a novel and a story collection, and how do you see this book? So, what was your first idea? And how did you
So I just turned 50 last week, and when I turned 40, I decided that my goal for the decade was that I wanted, and I'd been writing fiction for about a year and a half. Okay, by the time I'm 50, I would like to have a book published. And so I just made it under the wire two months ago. But when I was writing at the time, I didn't have anything in particular in mind, just a book. I took a bunch of fiction writing classes, not as part of a degree, but local authors and teachers. And one of the, I always like a writing prompt that kind of gets my creative juices flowing. So my teacher at the time, this was in 2010, gave me a prompt of write a story about somebody who's definitely not you, but who does something that you're interested in, or maybe as a job or as a hobby. You don't necessarily need to know a lot about that interest, but have to be curious about it. So the first story I wrote with that prompt was nothing to do with this book. It was about, Mom, maybe you remember this, a black woman who has her own landscape architecture business in Connecticut. And so I really enjoyed getting into somebody else's skin, or trying to, writing from a different perspective of somebody who's definitely not me. I also really enjoyed the research aspects of that. I had to figure out what plants would she be planting in somebody's garden. And in fact, my mom brought the story to Wakeman's nursery to fact check to make sure that I got the plants right. And I got really good feedback on that story from my teacher. He took me aside after class and said, the words that every aspiring writer wants to hear, like, you have what it takes, keep going with this. I really loved the story. So I decided to use that same prompt for my next story also, write about somebody who's definitely not me. So the first story I wrote about Jeremiah takes place when he's 82. It actually ends up being the last story in this book. He's 82 and he takes up baking. But I made it a little closer to home. I made him a Jewish man, and I do know something about baking. So as soon as I finished writing that first story about Jeremiah, I was really enamored with his character and decided, okay, now I want to write a whole book about him, and I want to do it in stories. I had recently read Olive Kitteridge, and I really loved that book, which is, they might have marketed it I think they marketed it as a novel, but it's also a novel in stories. It was written, several of the stories were published as standalone stories. So that was, once I had the first story and that model of Olive Kitteridge in mind, that's when I decided that I wanted it to be a whole collection about it. I didn't know if I should call it, to answer your second part of your question, there's varying opinions of what to do. Last summer I was at a writer's conference and I met an agent, and the book had already been accepted for publication, and I told her about it, and she said, oh, just market it as a novel. Then I went back to the publisher, and this is published for Press 53, they only publish story collections and poetry collections. So he said, well, you can market it as a novel if you want, but you'll have to find a different publisher. I said, no, I'm just kidding. I didn't really, I want to stick with you. We'll call it, and he said it's fine to call it a novel and stories, but story collections is definitely important to them.
So I'd love to talk about the first story and then the shape of the collection as a whole. So the first story, if you haven't read it, is called A Strong Hand and an Outstretched Arm. And it begins with young Jeremiah dressed as a shochet, Purim, complete with a live chicken dropping feathers in the shul. And it ends with an equally funny Passover prank on the part of Jeremiah. This is one of my favorite stories, but it is told from the point of view of Jeremiah's mother. And by the way, I love the fact that this immigrant mother has changed her name from Rivki to what she feels is more American, Ricky. So I wondered why you began the book in Ricky's head instead of in Jeremiah's head, when it's really Jeremiah's book, and as far as I can tell, 8 of the 13 stories are indeed told from his point of view. And there's a second part to this question. So my first thought was chronology. Reading it the first time, well, he was a kid in this story. But then I read along and I came to the 6th story, Three Strikes, which takes place even earlier chronologically. Jeremiah is several years younger than in that first story. So it wasn't that you wanted to start with the earliest story. And then I saw on social media that one of the questions you are always asked is, why did you not set them in chronological order? So, why did you not tell them in chronological order? And why did you begin with the story you chose that happens to not be in Jeremiah's head?
So my first idea after I wrote that first story, Mixmaster, which is the last one when he was 82, was to do the whole thing in reverse chronological order. But then I decided for lots of reasons that that didn't work. And I played around with the order. Maybe I had 6 different, according to my spreadsheet, when I look back on it, I had 6 different ways I was considering ordering the book, and I kind of struggled with it for a while. I had flashcards with, themes and the stories and the characters and the points of view. And I went to a different writing conference a few years ago in 2015, and my teacher there really helped me figure out the structures by telling me to think about it in thirds. So in each third, I needed to kind of balance stories told from Jeremiah's point of view with the other characters' point of view, stories from younger Jeremiah and an older Jeremiah. And the other main important thing is I wanted to make sure there was like a common thread from story to story. So if in one story his wife Molly is pregnant with their son, the next story, or maybe it's the story before, is told from the son's point of view. Actually it's the story before that. And in the same story when Molly's pregnant, Jeremiah's just moved his family from Washington up to the Berkshires. He's worried about by the end of the story, he's worried, has he made the right choice? He's kind of doing a pivot in his career from government work into academia, and he's a little uncertain. He's just met his new colleagues for the first time. He's uncertain. Has he made the right decision? Is this going to be the right place for him? And then the story immediately after that jumps forward in time, I think 40 years, and we see that he's an emeritus, professor, and he has made it. So that's in terms of the way I ordered it. In terms of why I put A Strong Hand and Outstretched Arm first, I really have special feelings for that story. That one and Mixmaster, I would say the most. It's definitely takes place in Bridgeport in 1938, I think. And Jeremiah's parents are immigrants, much like my grandparents. So there's a lot of kind of going back to my grandparents, my grandmother's kitchen, and the fact that my grandfather had to keep the liquor store open until 11 o'clock, and Seder's only started at 11 o'clock, when he'd get home from the liquor store. Had to keep it open all the time. That story, by the way, was rejected over 100 times at different literary journals, and part of being a writer is just sticking to it and continuing to submit and trying not to take the rejections personally, and revising when necessary. I probably revised that one more than any other. The prank that you alluded to, I didn't have that in the initial story. That was my last major revision. I revised the last third of that story in 2015. That was the last major revision I did on the whole book. So I guess I had a special feeling for that story. Even though it's not told from Jeremiah's point of view, his personality is very much seen there, as opposed to the story that's earliest chronologically when he's like 6, and then that's really his brother's story. Although I love that one too. There's a lot of baseball and Yankees and Bridgeport in that one too. Oh, by the way, the reason that Jeremiah is dressed as a shochet, a lot of people will ask, if this is one of your questions, I hope I didn't take that. What? Okay. What's autobiographical? There's a lot of family tidbits in this whole book. Jeremiah is not based on any one person, but the fact that Jeremiah is dressed as a shochet is based on my father when he was 10 or 11. Yeah. 9. When he was 9, the grandson of a kosher butcher was dressed as a shochet for Purim, and he actually carried around a live chicken in Rosh Hashanah down the road, and he carried a real knife, real shochet's knife, right? I don't think that would fly today as part of the costume. Now, shochet is a ritual slaughterer. Ricky's son keeps the live chicken tucked under his arm, giving it a little zest every time the wicked Haman's name is chanted. She flinches with each squawk, but Jeremiah seems unconcerned by his mother's squeamishness. "Relax, what's to be afraid of?" says Ricky's husband. Leave it to Abe to dream up the Purim costume of a ritual slaughterer for their 11-year-old, arranging with the fowl market in East Bridgeport to borrow the bird for the night. Mottled tea-colored feathers drip to the floor, and Ricky collects them in tissues so the synagogue won't look like a chicken coop. Looped around Jeremiah's belt is a 6-inch long fake knife made out of plastic, a straight blade with no point at the end. Abe, the son of a kosher butcher himself, has declared the imitation to be very close to what a real shochet would use, though the chicken does not seem worried. When the reading is over, everyone shuffles into the social hall for the festive Purim activities. A few ladies shrink back at Jeremiah's chicken, but most people commend the Gerslers for their creativity. Even the synagogue's Hebrew teacher is bemused, shedding his customary exasperation. "A better costume for him you couldn't pick." Ricky offers a tight, uncomfortable smile. She detects an underhanded compliment. The man is not in the habit of heaping praise on her middle child. "A firm hand at home, some discipline is what he needs," the teacher had said only a few weeks ago, following Jeremiah's 2nd or 3rd prank in class. Oy vey's mir. Abe's many good qualities do not include toughness in the discipline department. Now, waiting for the magician and costume contest to begin, Ricky chats with her girlfriends while keeping an eye on her children. Lenny stands off to the side with another gangly 14-year-old, and Ruthie plays clapping games with 2 friends, all 3 little girls dressed as Queen Esther. Jeremiah is surrounded by a circle of boys waving their hands in his face. He bounces up and down, organizing the group in a line. An older boy fumbles with something in his pocket and procures 2 coins in exchange for a turn with the chicken. What in the world? Her son checks his wristwatch and after a minute signals to the boy that his time is up. With one hand, he reclaims the bird, extending his other palm to the next boy in line. "No!" Ricky arrives as the second boy fishes 2 pennies out of his pocket. We've got to give this chicken back tomorrow and we can't pass him around. Put your money away. Ma, Jeremiah starts, but his disappointment seems mild. He points to the older boy. I'm not giving Howie back his money. He already got his turn. I like to give little cameos to different people in my family. So my uncle Howie's right here. She doesn't have to look far to see where he comes up with these cockamamie ideas. Abe, over in the corner with a group of men, seems barely older than a boy himself, a baseball cap in place of his yarmulke. Her husband chuckles whenever she conveys the Hebrew teacher's reports. So new he put a caterpillar inside his teacher's yarmulke. That's a good one. During the costume fashion show, the audience gives hefty applause to a boy dressed as Haman and a girl dressed as the Scroll of Esther. To Ricky's surprise, the clapping intensifies when Jeremiah takes his turn. Terrific get-up, she hears. The chicken twists and strains as if wanting to escape, and her son makes a show of it, screwing his face into funny expressions. A regular performer, Abe's pals say, patting him on the back. Ricky would like to scurry after Jeremiah to collect the shedding feathers, but Abe holds her back. See how he carries himself in a crowd, Abe whispers, admiring. She wishes her affectionate feelings for Jeremiah would come more naturally. She is nagged by guilt that they don't. She knows she shouldn't compare her boys, but from Lenny she gets nachas, pride in his accomplishments. From Jeremiah, only tsuris, troubles and more troubles. A hush falls over the crowd as the rabbi announces the results of the costume contest. He proclaims Jeremiah as the overall winner, and the little shochet beams as if he's just eaten a month's worth of brisket. He bounds up to the stage to collect his prize, holding the chicken over his head in a victory pose. Even at a distance, Ricky recognizes the mischievous gleam in her son's eye. All her alarm bells go off. Jeremiah holds the bird by its neck and raises it above his head. She recites a silent prayer that he won't begin swinging it or fling the poor creature into the crowd. Frowning, the rabbi leans over to whisper something to Jeremiah. At once, the impish grin recedes, and Jeremiah tucks the chicken back under his arm. Ricky is faint with relief, but mortified, her cheeks scarlet. The rabbi obviously senses her son is a troublemaker, and his parents, failures. But the rabbi laughs. Wrong holiday. Never wasting an educational opportunity, he explains. Waving a chicken over the head to atone for sins is performed before Yom Kippur, not on Purim. You see, Abe whispers, he knows he hasn't behaved well lately, so he's repenting. Ricky's throat is dry. She's never heard her son express remorse for his mischief. Repent, she asks? I should live so long.
Thank you. That was great. So, I'm going to follow that humorous introduction to Jeremiah and his character with a more serious question about Jeremiah through the book. Throughout the book, Jeremiah is variously described as a no-good-nick by Ricky, a troublemaker, cantankerous, mercurial, volatile, impulsive, unhinged, and perhaps a telling adjective, lonely. He makes scenes and causes trouble, as well as discomfort for those around him. From his childhood pranks to his 80th birthday celebration in the title story, The Book of Jeremiah, where he gives a very embarrassing speech at an event in his honor. So I wondered whether it was difficult to write about a character who is sometimes unlikable, or do you think of him as unlikable? And I had read in some of your online interviews your reference to Olive Kitteridge, which you mentioned. Have you all read Olive Kitteridge? So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you were influenced by Olive, who was also a cantankerous, somewhat unlikable character, or any other books or fictional characters. And whether you like him or you don't, or what do you think about it?
I do like him. He obviously has a lot of flaws, but who doesn't? Yeah, first of all, it's fun to write about characters behaving badly, because if everybody behaved well in books, it wouldn't be a very interesting book. And what I liked about Olive Kitteridge, first of all, by the way, when I thought I was going to approach agents for this book, my query letter to the agents started out with something like, if Olive Kitteridge could be reincarnated as a Jewish man, you'd have Jeremiah Gersler, something like that. So also in that book, she comes across, certainly initially, as not such a likable character, but with every story, every story reveals more and more layers of her character. And you come to have more sympathy and empathy for her as the book goes on. So the same is true here. I think there's definitely many stories where Jeremiah is not behaving as he should, but then there's other stories where he comes in and he's kind of the hero, he certainly is very adoring of his wife. That is one thing that never falters for him. He's just, he's feels very fortunate to be married to his wife Molly, and I'd say that's like the number one rule in his life, or the way we see him behaving well most of the time. That doesn't mean that sometimes they don't get in fights, and sometimes he does things that subverts the truth so that he won't upset her, things like that. But yeah, certainly Olive was definitely a model. But overall, I like Jeremiah. I think deep down he's a mensch, even though he sometimes acts, irresponsibly or lashes out. But overall, I like him. I hope readers do too.
I do. Let me know whenever you want to stop for another reading. So, a little bit more about Jeremiah as a character. In the story Transcendental, which is the 8th out of the 13 stories, this story is told from the point of view of Jeremiah's son, Stuart. So in that story, Stuart seems to imply that Jeremiah is mentally ill. And I haven't really thought about that. I get to the 8th story, and I think this is a cantankerous guy, and then I read this story. Stuart comes home from college for his sister Hannah's wedding, and he sees, quote, clear signs of his father's mental deterioration. And I said, what does that mean? And then through the story, he draws on his college psych course, I think he was a freshman, to throw out terms like anxiety, denial, defense mechanisms, neurosis, and he even at one point in the story thinks that he should study more psych or maybe even become a psychiatrist so that he could, quote, heal his father. So I wondered, do you think of Jeremiah as having a diagnosable mental or emotional condition or illness, or is he just an ordinary, difficult person? And can you talk about the loneliness that I briefly mentioned and any other characteristics or events that might help us to better understand him and to care about him?
I would characterize him as just an ordinary, difficult person. I had his son, Stuart, come home from college all excited about, his psychology class, and what's the phrase, a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. He thinks like now he's taking Psych 101, he's gonna be his father's therapist or diagnose, or he knows everything that's going on with his father. Which, in Israel, by the way, we have majors in high school. They're not that serious, but two of my kids so far, psychology was one of their majors. And my son sometimes would come home and say all sorts of things like, oh, I think I'm this, or so-and-so is like that. I'm like, okay, calm down. It's not, you don't really know. I mean, not that I'm a psychologist either, but so that was what I was trying to get across with his son, making all sorts of assumptions. Jeremiah in his later life does feel very lonely. He has his wife, but he's done a lot of things to kind of annoy people, push people away. He has one big traumatic event in his life when he's around 19. I'm not going to say what it is, but I'd say that also affects affects him greatly. Like, I feel like there's a bit of a personality shift after that. What else can I say about his character? He's very ambitious. I'd say he's a bit of a workaholic. He loves his job. He's a professor, and his research, and that's kind of his religion. He's not very observant as an adult. And he's culturally Jewish, but nothing beyond that. So his work is, his daughter, says he has like a one-track mind about his work, which is not 100% fair on her part either. I don't think he does. He's does care a lot for his family, but ambition and work mean a lot to him as well. And the loneliness comes out, as I said, later in life in this second story, which is the title story of the book of Jeremiah, where he kind of looks around and realizes that they've invited a bunch of their friends to this event of his, but he realizes they're really mostly Molly's friends, not his friends. It causes him to reflect.
Well, he also, I see loneliness even earlier in his adult life. He goes to Washington and he feels like an outsider, and then he goes into academics and he feels like an outsider. There's always a feeling of, do I belong? And that feels like loneliness to me also. So that's interesting, the event you won't share about where you see it, the change in him, because I hadn't thought about that and now I see it. I wondered if you could talk about the role of history in the book. There is a lot of history as background for the stories and setting them in time. The Depression, wars, the Civil Rights Movement, even reference to Watergate. So what role do you think history plays in the writing of the book and in the telling of the story?
Yeah, I love research and history, and I think the third story I wrote takes place when he's a soldier in World War II in the Signal Corps, which my maternal grandfather served in the Signal Corps in World War II, and I did a lot of research for that one to find out what were soldiers in the Signal Corps doing. There's another character in that story who's a combat nurse, so I looked up, what would a combat nurse have been doing during the Battle of the Bulge, things like that. And I really loved the research part of this. So that, once I wrote that story, it kind of got me hooked. Okay, I definitely want to weave in real world events into some of the other stories. As you mentioned, Vietnam there's a story at the tail end of the Vietnam War. There's a story that references like early usage of LSD, magical mushrooms. So I love the research. I also, as I was thinking about the collection as a whole, this is kind of interwoven with what Jewish Americans experience in the 20th century. So the last story I wrote takes place in 1964 during the Civil Rights Movement, and I had a completely different story that I had written that takes place in 1964 about Jeremiah and Molly. Also, it's the same one where she's pregnant with the son and they've moved from Washington to the Berkshires. And I had a totally different story told from Molly's perspective about a neighbor. Anyway, I ended up throwing out the story, but keeping the location and the year the same. So I said, well, what else? What was happening in the U.S. in the summer of 1964? I opened up Google, Wikipedia. Oh, that was Freedom Summer, Civil Rights movement, and that was, when the three civil rights workers were found missing, dead and missing. I was writing this, or thinking about this in the summer of 2014, where in Israel we had just had the three boys were kidnapped and murdered, and there were posters of them and pictures of them all over social media, and I was really struck by the similarities in the posters of the missing from 1964 to 2014. Oh my God, I have to write about this. And it would also fit in because, I'd already written about World War II, and the Depression, and Vietnam. Oh, I definitely have to write about that civil rights.
So that's the story. That's how history.
And when I wrote that story, and I sent it to my parents, and my mom read it. Some of the stories I knew there was a personal connection, like with my grandfather. But that story I didn't know of any personal connection. I sent it to my parents, and my mom said, well, your uncle was down in Mississippi during Freedom Summer volunteering with the Lawyers for Civil Rights. I had no idea. So then I got on the phone and I interviewed my uncle, and he was there when they found the day that they found the bodies. So I think I took like 4 pages of single-spaced notes. Probably only 1 or 2 lines of that made it into the story, but I had no idea. No, their older brother. He's in Israel right now.
So I also wanted to talk about the importance of place in your writing. The sections set in Washington, D.C., and then in the brochures seem to me as a reader to have a very strong sense of place and to really belong in those places. And here, this is interesting because I read this book 3 times, and until you were reading the first page of the first story, I missed the reference to East Bridgeport all 3 times, and I didn't really realize that the childhood was in Connecticut until page 65, when there's another mention of Bridgeport. So I wondered if you could talk about the role of place in the book as a whole, and in the sections and the stories, and is your Connecticut childhood important to your writing? And you've already shared some of that.
I would say definitely the sense of place is important to a lot of the stories, not just the ones in Washington and Berkshires, but also there's one story that takes place in Israel.
Yes.
So that one was easy to write in terms of the place and the descriptions. I like to set stories in New England, and to have this one, 2 of the stories set in Bridgeport was important to me. In fact, this is my advanced reader's copy, but on the actual cover, there's a very faint background, and it's a map of Bridgeport. Yeah. So, it could have been a map of Berkshires also, but this is better, I think, that is Bridgeport. I thought the cover needed some texture. So, and not just, I would say, not just the general area, but some of the places that are important to me. There's a story that describes Jeremiah going to the JCC, and our JCC here is now been torn down and rebuilt into something else, but describes the way the facade of the JCC that was on Main Street. Many of you remember it. And in fact, that was one of the options for one of my thoughts for the cover is to find a picture of the facade of the old JCC and, work that in somehow. But I think a lot of the New England towns, like Bridgeport, or cities like, it could have probably also been New Haven or Hartford or Providence and somewhere like that. But yeah, I like to reference things, as I said, give cameos to things. So I think I probably named some of the streets after places where my grandparents lived and things like that. There's reference to William Street, I think, which is where you guys lived.
So I'm also a fiction writer, and I know that fiction is not autobiography, and yet we do reveal personal truths in our fiction. So here in your childhood shul, I felt like I really needed to ask, is there anything about this book that you're particularly happy to share or that you're anxious about sharing with all of these wonderful people, many of whom may have known you most of your life?
That's such a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer for it, but I'm happy with the way it came out, and I was asked in one of the interviews, just like, well, what do you want the takeaway to be? So it's funny, even though I finished the last revision in 2015 already, so it's been a while, but even in the process of writing some blog posts and answering interview questions, I'm kind of learning more about the book even today. So that's fun. So I think that a takeaway that I would like is that the book is a lot about family. This was another question somebody asked me in Israel. You've lived in Israel 25 years, and yet you set the whole, most of the book in America. Do you feel like you still know America well enough to write this book? And I said, I think I do. We come back every summer, and all of our family is still here on both sides. But it got me thinking about why did I set the book? Why is a lot of my writing set here? Even though, if I want to describe a place, it's obviously easier to describe Israel, where I look at, every day. And I think the reason that this is set here, this book is about family, I would say. It's about accepting, family members who might be more difficult family members. It's about, loss, but also forgiveness and hope. And so it's natural to me that I set it in America when it's about family, and family, my family is all here. In some ways, I think it might be easier for me to get into the mind of an 82-year-old man, Jewish American man, than it might be to get into the head of an Israeli woman my own age, because my roots are very deep here. In terms of, so that's, I guess, what I want the takeaway to be from the book is that we should all try to be a little more forgiving of difficult people, and sometimes our difficult family members who are it's hardest to be forgiving of them. But if you approach things with love and acceptance, then love wins. In terms of it's great to be here in Bethel, I have to say. It brings back a lot of memories. And there's a line in the book that I recall my rabbi, Leibel Waldman, saying many times over the high holidays. So that's in here too. Great to be here.
So I wanted to ask about what's coming next for you. Do you want to read more first, or should we finish talking and then you'll read some more?
Read now. So now I'm going to read that story that has the label line in it. See if you recognize it. This is the earliest story in the book chronologically. It's called Three Strikes. It takes place in 1932. It's in his whole 9 years, Lenny can't remember feeling this mixed up, even though he hasn't done anything wrong. He's sitting next to his father in the synagogue, listening as the congregation recites the special Rosh Hashanah prayer. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, we have sinned before you. The adults around him chant the haunting, powerful melody, first in a murmur, then in a louder, unified plea for God to be gracious. If God is so great, Lenny wants to know, why, this year of all years, when his favorite team is playing, does the Jewish New Year fall on the same day as the World Series? The last time the Yanks were in the series, Lenny had been too young to appreciate it. Later, after the festive lunch and the relatives have gone home, Lenny plans to slip out of the house and walk over to the Barnum Avenue drugstore, where the neighborhood men will be listening to today's game. He's not usually a sneaky boy, and he hopes God will forgive him this once. Inside the synagogue, the service drags on, and Lenny is jealous of his younger brother, Jeremiah, who at 6 is allowed to play outside. Lenny isn't thinking about the prayers. His mind is on the hits, runs, and strikeouts. The sweet crack of the bat connecting with the ball. The thunder of the crowd pulsing through the static of the radio. He tugs on his father's suit jacket and asks if he can go outside for a bit. But no, he's benched. The elder Gerstler shushes him and tells him he must stay in for longer. He shifts in his seat, daydreaming about the moment later today when the Yankees will sweep the series. He's sure of it. Despite the prohibition of turning the radio on during Rosh Hashanah, he's learned from a non-Jewish neighbor that the Yanks beat the Cubs in yesterday's game, bringing the series to 3-0. He felt the agony of missing the game, but was triumphant at the news. Today, even though he knows he should be praying for forgiveness and redemption, he's beseeching God for a Yankees win. Give heed to the clarion call of the shofar, the rabbi bellows for the 3rd time today. That's the line. Yeah, okay. Some of the adults are bored. He can hear murmuring the rows behind. Finally, towards the end of the service, his father relents and allows Lenny to go out and play. Lenny makes his way to the empty lot next door, where other boys with fathers who are not as strict are playing. Stickball for the older boys and marbles for the younger. His brother is kneeling in the dust, counting his pile of coveted bluish-green corkscrew marbles, his white holiday shirt and navy knickers smeared with dirt. Lenny smiles, thinking of his plan. After lunch, he's going to volunteer to look after Jeremiah so his parents can rest, but then they'll sneak to the drugstore to catch the game. He's even saved a bit of honey and a peanut chew, one to get Jeremiah out of the house and the other in exchange for a promise not to tell. The kid might not know about baseball, at least not yet, but he'll do anything for candy. It's surefire. Lenny leans against the wall and turns his attention to the stickball players, wishing they let him play and dreaming of being a better hitter. The boys are focused on their own game, arguing over who's batting next, yelling at the boy who just struck out. But Lenny wants to talk about the series. A better lineup the Yanks couldn't have, he says, rattling off the batting order. Lou Gehrig batting 4th with a grand slam. He mimics an announcer's voice and assumes Gehrig's slugging stance. When no one picks up the conversation, he starts reciting batting averages for the Yankees lineup. Aren't you a real Abercrombie, says an older kid as he gets up to bat. Lenny shrugs. It's not the first time he's been called a know-it-all. One of his father's friends calls him Bridgeport's #1 baseball whiz, a title he wears proudly. He and Johnny Allen, the rookie pitcher, share a birthday. But the other boys don't seem interested in statistics, so after a bit, Lenny wanders over back to the marble game, just in time to see Jeremiah flick a reddish-blue marble into the circle for a win. Secretly, he's looking forward to their afternoon together. He would like to tell Jeremiah about the plan, but he's afraid he'll tell Mother and Papa by accident. He knows it will work. With Johnny Allen as the starting pitcher, the Yanks can't lose.
Just like this book, you can't lose. So, I wanted to ask what's next for you. Can you share with us what you're working on now and when we're going to read more of your work?
Well, I have a novel draft that's in the drawer right now. In the drawer meaning not taking it out. I'm not opening up the file on my computer because I've been really focused on all this. But I've also been working on some shorter essays and flash fiction, which are stories that are under 1,000 words. So hopefully some of those will coming out sooner than any novel will. But the novel, I don't really know what's going to happen with it. It's that one takes place in Israel. It's about a Jewish Arab women's biking group. So yeah, I am in a biking group. It's not a mixed biking group though. It's just Israelis and me. And it takes place during like 2015 when there was a lot of lone wolf stabbings and car rammings, as you probably remember. So I don't really know what's going to, I have a complete first draft. I now need to get through a complete second draft, but it's been difficult, kind of two steps back. So we'll see.
Essays and science fiction, is that they're out there?
Oh yeah, I have lots of flash fiction and other, and one essay that's been published so far. I took a class in January on essay writing, so I have a couple essays I've been working on. One is just about finished, ready to be sent off. I haven't sent it yet. And flash fiction, yeah, I also just took another class and have a few stories I'm about to send off. You'll have to wait to see if my essay is published. Sure. Some people will just call it by its the word count. So some people say under 1,000 words. Other people have more stricter definitions that it has to show a lot of movement. I forget all the definitions. I go by word count, but it's a very, very short story. It's a complete, beginning, middle, and end, but all in 1,000 words or less. Some people even say 500 words or less. There's a lot of online journals that publish flash fiction. Yeah, it's funny. I went full. Like when I first started submitting stories, I did not submit anywhere that published online. I only wanted print journals because I thought, oh well, online journals they want to, it'll be easier to get into those because they need to constantly be updating their. Now I've gone the complete other way around. I only submit to places that will publish the story online, maybe in print also, but also online. That's a good way to get it. Why? Why have I gone the other? Well, the problem with print journals, they have tiny circulations. I mean, when Justin was reading my, my bio, none of the journals I was published in are household names at all. It's not like they're not like the New Yorker and the Atlantic. So even though some of those are decent journals, maybe 100 people get them or 300 people. So the online gives a much wider audience.
I have two questions, Julie. The first is short. Do you have a certain time of day that you like to write? So that's the first one. The second one is, since you've lived so much of your life in Israel, how do you think that affected your looking back at your family stories?
So the first one is easy. I prefer to write in the morning. Sometimes I get up really early, 5:15 or so. When I was writing the novel draft, I set my alarm every day for 5:15, and I wrote from about 5:15 to 6:45 when I had to start getting the kids up and get ready for school, as well as if I was organized and got the kids out of school early and had a little time before I had to be at work, I would try to run to a cafe and get a half an hour of writing there. In the last 4 years, I've been commuting by train, and we have a very nice commuter train in Israel, with tables and everything. So I also do writing on the train, and if I see somebody I know, I kind of say hi, and I go to my work. I ignore them, or sometimes I don't even, and pretend I didn't see people. And
So the second question was, having lived so much in Israel, how do you think that affected how you look back on your American stories?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly. So as I said, I come back, every year. I'm in close touch with my family and my husband's family, and they come and visit, and has it affected? Think about that one. Maybe that'll be a topic for a new essay.
When you write, do you think in Hebrew or English?
Mostly English, but there's plenty of words that I think in Hebrew. I'm talking to my kids or other Anglo-Israelis. We speak a combination of English and Hebrew because there's some words that just come more naturally in Hebrew. In my novel draft, it takes place in Israel. I have to kind of think about how much do I want to have the word in Hebrew. I don't want to translate it directly, but somehow get across in the context or later in the paragraph what the meaning might be. So, I make the reader do a little work. but in thinking, I'm mostly thinking in English.
So then I have a question then. You said you're on Hebrew? I mean, Rob's writing some daily life.
Yeah.
Would you write any fictional essays?
No, I have not attempted that. Debbie?
So the book, the characters, the dialogue, the cultural references, it's all heavily Jewish. But his publisher is here, and the book is online, so actually there will be a non-Jewish readership. What, have you had any reactions from non-Jews? Are you optimistic at all about the reactions?
Not really, but I mean, it's funny that the two sections I read are heavily Jewish, but some of the other stories are not at all. They, he happens to be Jewish, but you might not even know that from some of the stories. And yeah, my publisher is based in North Carolina. I don't know if he's published any other Jewish authors, but that first story where it takes place in Purim, that's the story he read, and that kept him going, and eventually chose the collection. So it was enough of a hook for him, even though I was not that familiar with it. I'm also, as you probably know, I'm active in Twitter. So I've met writers from all over the world, and getting, so plenty of non-Jewish readers have also been buying the book and reading it, and hearing from people, that don't have that much familiarity with some of the topics, and they still seem to be enjoying it. I don't feel apprehensive about it.
Are you expecting to try to translate the book into Hebrew?
Possibly, not yet though, but a few of my friends, my Israeli friends, came to my book launch in Israel, and they bought the book, just to be nice or whatever, but well, we're going to try to read it in English. So far one has read it, the other two are saving it for when they have time, I don't know. But yeah, it would be great to translate it to Hebrew. I haven't had the time to deal with that yet and figure out how I would need to do that. No, would not do it myself. Well, my husband is as one of his side jobs is a translator, but he's translating from Hebrew into English, also mostly academic stuff.
You talked about in the beginning when you just started to write or think about writing, that you work with other writers. Did you work with Israeli writers? Because there are wonderful Israeli women that write and are very successful. Were you influenced by Israeli, or you, like me, most of the time, you read English, I read more English?
The writers I've taken classes with and who have been in my writing groups and my workshop my stories with have all been English speakers, but of course I've gone to hear lots of Israeli writers speak. I'll travel far and wide to hear an author speak. I'll go to Jerusalem. My writing teacher who gave me that prompt, who I really consider my mentor, he lived like an hour and a half away from me, and first of all, I went there every other week to take a class with him, and he also did a lot of author events, and so he exposed me to a lot of other Israeli authors and playwrights that I didn't know before. I would recommend El Hadaya. You probably read it for her. I think I got you one of her books, Mom. But she's not very well known outside of Israel, but she's a wonderful writer. So I've gone to hear them speak. I just ordered my first Zuriya Shalev book. Got it when I got to the States yesterday. But I haven't taken any classes with them.
By the way, Amos Oz used to speak English quite well, and he came here to promote his books. And yet, when he had to translate to English the most dear book about his own life, he gave it to somebody else.
He is a translator. He had a translator for all his books. I actually went to.
No, I mean, especially one that is so his feet.
Yeah.
And yet he didn't take the chance to do it in a language that he's not as strong as.
I think translating is also a real art. I don't have any experience with myself, but I've heard him speak a few times. I have a picture of myself with him, and one of the times I heard him speak was at a translators conference, which my writing mentor is also a translator. He's translated books for Mary Shalev, and so he organized the conference. They brought in like 7 or 8 of Amos' as translators from all different countries. I don't think his English translator was there, but from Norway and China, and all over, and they bring them in for a week in Jerusalem where they get to spend time with the author and talk about translation. But yeah, I would imagine that you would want to use a professional translator. Yeah. Well, I want to say a couple thank yous. First of all, thank you very much to Liz. It's great to meet you finally in person. And thanks for the great questions and reading the book 3 times. Wow. Thank you to Justin for helping, and Susan for helping to organize this. Thank you to my parents for doing an amazing job on the marketing. I mean, Dad, I hope you took a picture back here with my phone. I don't know if you did. One other thank you I want to say to my 10th grade English teacher who's here, Bruce Lippman, who I've not seen for many, many years. And very special that he came. And you were very tough on us in 10th grade in writing, in revising many, many times. I've told the story a lot of times that we would hand in a paper, you would give it back to us all marked up without a grade. We'd hand it in again. Again, you would give it back to us all marked up without a grade. And this went back on for 3 or 4 drafts, I think. So that was my first, you really turned me into a writer with that class. So thank you very much. It was great. Oh, one more thing I want to say. If you read the book and you liked it, I'm looking for more people to write reviews on Amazon because that really will help me. So thank you in advance for helping with that. Oh, and if you're part of a book club or anything like that, I'm really happy to meet with book clubs, either in person if possible or remotely via Skype. I can do it in the middle of the night. I don't really sleep that much, so that's a problem. Also, thank you all for coming. Thanks to my daughter for barely staying awake back there.